Welcome back to Living with a Classic, and the work continues on swapping out the engine, my daily driven 1975 XJ6. So we got both engines on the ground here, the old one I pulled out and the new one, and I've started to strip off all the parts from the new engine that I haven't purchased, that haven't come with the engine, and I've started to remove all the parts I need from the old engine. So now it's time to install all of that onto the new engine and basically prepare it in order to lift it back into the engine bay, hopefully in the next video or two. So I got the engine here on the ground. Let me show you the plan. Here is the engine. It is a Series 1 engine, so it's a little different than what I had before, but I'll move over a lot of parts I need. So as you can see, I removed the oil filter housing and I removed the distributor. I want to use my Series 3 part. I have a Series 3 oil filter housing and a Series 3 electronic distributor, electronic ignition. So I want to use that. I also want to use the water pump I have because I want to use the same fan clutch I've been using, which is in good shape. So I removed the water pump, but I may not do the water pump until the engine's actually in, because you can really easily do that later. And there is the transmission I removed, the BorgWarner 12, and there is my BorgWarner 66 I will be using. So I have the engine set to top dead center at the moment, and I thought it'd be a good idea to put in the distributor now. I have it set, I removed the old one, it was pointing at cylinder 6, so basically down here at the power steering pump. So put that in, because then I can remove the flex plate, which goes with the BorgWarner 12 transmission, and put on the flex plate that goes with the one I want. And the engine may move a little bit when I remove that. So I think the distributor is a good place to start. The end of the distributor has a key here, so it really only fits one way because you see it's not in the middle. But still, it's easy to remember where it was pointing when it came out. So I set it so it was pointing at number 6 down there. So it should just slot in. There we go. And then there is the bolt back here that holds it. So we'll set that, and I'm going to set the distributor sort of where it looked like it was on the other engine, like how much space was around the bolt. And then, of course, before we fire it the first time, we will set the timing statically in the car just so that it fires up nicely. Now that the distributor is in, I can take off this old flex plate and put on the correct one. This one fits the other transmission. The reason I'm doing it in this order is once the distributor is in, it doesn't really matter if the engine rotates. It might rotate a little bit when I take this off, but shouldn't really with an impact. So kind of remember, these are 3/4 size bolts. Bunch them around here. They're locking tabs. I've already knocked those back, and hopefully it should come off pretty easily. There's the last one. Here is the ring with the locking tabs, and I think a couple hits with a hammer or a dead blow should start to come off. Can be a little tricky to get off sometimes. I think it should be pretty much almost loose now. And there we go. Very heavy old thing. And if I'm looking at it closely, these tend to be stronger, the early ones. But it does look like cracks over there. I'm not sure. Yep, cracks. So definitely not reusable in this current state. Will need to be fixed. And good thing I'm not using this one. Now everything's off here, I'll just have a brief look at a couple things. First of all, just making sure there are no massive leaks or anything like that, and I mean it is nice and dry. Tiniest little bit of wetness down here, but I mean that is hardly anything at all. I actually don't think it's coming from here. I think it was coming from up here earlier, because the previous owner had issues when it was initially together with his engine with leaks from up here, and then he replaced the banjo bolts and it stopped leaking. There was some oil up here. I think that's just residual from that, because there were no drops on the ground or anything like that from oil, at least from this engine sitting. But one other thing I've done, everything should be the same, but I want, of course, that the torque converter sits in the right position like before. So I've measured a couple things. That this is exactly the same thickness. I'm not sure what you call it, the end of the crank here. They're the same thickness on both engines. And I measured the distance from here to here. So if I measure that on here as well, it's hard to get exact, but I have measured until the ridge here, and then I measured that distance. So that distance from there to there is the same on both engines. And let's see, that is almost 31 millimeters, and that was the same on the other one. So we're good to go. It should be in the exact same position. So the only thing I'm going to do is just clean this area up a little bit. I'm not going for perfection like we talked about before. This is a daily driver, but I do like to clean up things just a little bit. So we just have some engine degreaser on here. And just clean up the area a little bit. And then we'll get ready to put on the correct flex plate for the BorgWarner 66 transmission. So here is the correct flex plate I want to use, and I'll look through a couple things. This one is thinner than the old one, so here's an interesting thing. The bolts are the same, except the ones for, let's see, my gloves are kind of big. If you can see, there is a bit of a difference there. So these are quite a bit longer for the BorgWarner 12 than these are. So I of course checked if I were to use those, they would have bottomed out into the block. So we're going to use these ones, and then there is also this thing that goes on here, and we have the locking ring. Unfortunately, I forgot to pick one up, and we're a little bit of a not like a deadline, but winter's coming. I want to get this car out of here because it's taking up the space of two cars that I want to have in here instead of having down in storage. So I'm going to pick whichever one of these is in best shape. And that is this one. It's in pretty good shape. And let us put this on. Okay, that is fully in place. Then we're putting this thing on. And then we have our little thing which goes like that. And we can start putting the bolts back in. So I'm just going to tighten them down normally first with a ratchet, and then of course they get torqued to 67 foot-pounds or 91 Newton meters. And then once they're done, you bend these tabs over so that they touch on one of the sides here. If it doesn't line up perfectly, you can adjust them a little bit so that it locks them in place. And that's the last one, all torqued down. I'll just bend over those tabs real quickly and that's done. Just a good tip if you want to hold the crankshaft still, just get a long breaker bar and a socket on the front and turn it around until it hits the ground, and then everything stays still when you're trying to torque it down. So we'll do that, then we will move on to, let's see, what should we do next? I think the oil filter house is the next thing. Actually, before we put on the filter housing itself, which just goes on here, I'm going to do something about the oil pressure sender. So this one is for the warning light, but we need one like this. We're going to drop that. Like this, that goes to the gauge. This is the one from my old engine. I know it works well, and I've checked it with, I put in a gauge here, about a year ago or something, and I checked that it is pretty much accurate. It's off 1 or 2 psi, and it mounts here. So I'm hoping that this plug has an oil passage in it, so I can just put this in the same place. And definitely looks like there's oil in there. And we'll put this on here. Doesn't look the greatest, this sender, but it doesn't leak and it shows the right reading. And once the carbs and everything are back on, no one's going to see it. And once again, daily driver. I'm trying my best not to make this into a show car or anything like that. I want to just be able to drive it, because I know that if I make it too nice, this car, I know myself, I'm not going to want to drive it when the weather gets bad or anything like that. And the whole point of this car really is to use it, to have one that I feel I can use whenever I want to drive an old XJ. There we go. That should be nice and oil tight in there. Now we got two things to have a look at here. Oil filter housing here, and then this pickup pipe is not the same. The one from the other one only goes up to here, but the oil level in the sump is probably somewhere around here. I think we'll use a vacuum extractor just to remove a bit of oil from the sump. I can open this up, and I don't think I have one of those gaskets, so I'm gonna have to make one. Put the other pipe in there, clean up this area a bit. I do have a new gasket for the oil filter housing, and put that new one on. So I've decided not to drain any oil. I have a catch pen here, and we'll open this up. It will pour out oil. I'm okay with that. It will just pour out to the level of here, I think, basically, or maybe I might change my mind. We'll see. But the whole idea is this engine has pretty fresh oil in it, and I'm not being cheap or anything like that, but I want to run what's in it, plus I'll probably add a little bit with what I lose now. Run that for maybe half an hour or so, just to flush through basically my old oil cooler, because it will have some of the old contaminated oil in the other engine, which most likely has some coolant in it, and that's why. So I just don't want to have to pour in brand new oil that I'll just have to pour out again after half an hour. But we'll see. If this ends up being an absolute catastrophe, then I'll have the drain plug right there, and I'll just empty it out with oil, and then we'll buy some cheap oil at the parts store just to run for those 30 minutes just to flush everything through. Let's see how much of a mess I'll make. Quite a bit of a mess, but I just saw something. I forgot there's an O-ring in there. So I'm going to grab the other pipe really quickly, and we'll push that in really quickly, tighten everything up, and we shouldn't lose more than a couple drops of oil. Got the other pipe over here, so we'll do a quick changeover. I did remove the O-ring. It's sat on this pipe, and on this one it seems to be stuck in the sump instead. There we go. Didn't make too much of a mess. Put the hardware back on, and I didn't clean the top of it because it would make a mess anyways, and I can clean it once it's on the engine. Also, I do plan on just degreasing the lower part of the engine that just has a little bit of grime on it, not very much at all. before it goes into the car. And as you saw, yeah, the engine oil is definitely not brand new. It's a little black. The owner did use this car all summer, but definitely nothing wrong with it, just running it for a little bit. Like I said, flushing through the system. I have done my best to try and get everything out of the oil cooler. And that's a hard word to say, oil cooler, but it, you know, there might be a little bit something left in there. And there we go. Let's get some rags. Okay, that's not perfect, but pretty good. I'll clean it up, like I said, when we degrease everything a little bit later. Now, I'm gonna get my new gasket out for that, clean up the oil filter housing, then we can stick that on. Got everything prepared here. I've cleaned and degreased this area over here. This is the oil filter housing I'm gonna use, the Series 3 one. Cleaned it up a bit, but not perfect, but the black paint over here, can't get off and clean the block, but it is nice and clean now. Got a new gasket and some Hylimer blue. So I'm going to set this on here with the Hylimer blue, and then we have the bolts that I've cleaned up as well. That is one side done. Originally there would be nothing on these, but I think Hylimer blue is a good thing to use. It doesn't get too hard, so even if some of it were to come off and come into the oil system, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's nice that you can take it apart again pretty easily, and well, I mean, it makes everything oil tight. Because you don't know about this housing, this might not be the first time it's been off. It could be a little bit warped, something like that. It didn't leak on the other engine at least, so that is a good thing. Okay, got a nice even coverage all over, and then you just let it sit until the solvent in there flashes off, and I'll clean off my hands. Then we can put it into place, slide the hose on there. But then we have a little bit of an issue to tackle, but we'll get to that then. Alright, the solvent has flashed off now, so this should be ready to go on. I'm just going to stick some of the bolts through it to more easily hold everything in place. And that hose over there, I replaced that 2 years ago when I did the first spruce up of the old engine, and it should still be good. Otherwise, I had thought about replacing it now, but I didn't have any left in that size. So if it does leak, it's fairly easy to just remove that and that pipe during an oil change. Okay, just gonna make sure we get all these started. Okay, there we go. Just gonna tighten these down. I haven't looked at the torque spec, but I mean, just reasonably tight. There's a gasket in there that should keep it all tight, and I have put Hylimer on there as well. So all in all, that should be good. And I can just tighten up the hose clamp that I put down there, and all of that is done. But now we're on to the first sort of difficulty of this whole swap. Now we're on to sort of the difficult thing, which has been sort of bothering me for about a week or so, trying to figure this out. So this is an early block, and you might recognize these. These are the oil pipes for the camshafts. On an early block, it grabs oil from down there and goes up to the camshafts from right in there. However, on later Series 1 and Series 2 and Series 3 versions of this engine, it grabs it from the oil filter housing over there. So you might say, okay, that's not a big issue. Well, I mean, it's not a massive issue, but I'm trying to figure out which way is the best. I've talked to a couple experts on these engines, and basically they said that there's a reason that they switch to grabbing the oil from the oil filter housing. Apparently it's better flow or something. So this is what I wanted to do. But then, you know, I live in metric land where getting a bolt to fit in there is kind of difficult. So I was looking around all the spare engines I have. So just here is the banjo bolt that fits in there. I can't put that back in because it would just leak oil. And all the other fasteners I found on the engine are different. This is coarse thread as well. And then my wife basically saves the day. About a year or so ago, she ordered a new saddle for one of the horses. And when it arrived, it was held in a shipping crate with these bolts and some other things. And when we took it all apart, she handed these to me. She said, you know what, maybe you'll have some use of them, because she said it said 3/8 on them. And she said they're probably not metric, and they're not. So I just put them in the box, and they are the exact same thread that these are. So I shortened one, put some copper washers on it. You can hardly see that in there. See if I can swing the engine over a bit so you can see it better. There we go. And I put that in there, and that should hopefully be oil tight. If it leaks, I'll take it out and put some thread locking tape on it, but I think that should be oil tight. And then I'll just reuse the bolts up here, put all that back together with new things, and hook that down over there in the oil filter housing. We've gone through replacing the copper washers up here in other videos before. It is very important to use the correct ones because they're banjo bolts and they have oil passages. So when you get the new ones, put them on and just hold them up here and make sure that the banjo bolt is in the middle of this oil pipe, so you know you'll get good feed to the camshafts. And this looks like it is in a very good place. I'm just going to clean off a little bit of dirt on that. There we go. And we will put these in. The previous owner got some longer banjo bolts made for his engine because the threads were stripped up here. So it's been threaded a little bit longer, he said, and put some other bolts in there. Let's see how we're gonna snake this past here. There we go. And of course I have new copper washers on there. And we'll put on the second one. And you don't have to tighten these that much. Just snug them down. The copper washers are going to do the sealing job. I'm also being very careful because he did say the threads are not that great over here. Then it's that pipe over here. Just goes in there. And I gotta get the correct wrench for that. But I'll put that in place, and I'm going to move this water hose pipe, a little bit, so it flows a little bit smoother. Maybe I'll have to grab the one from the other engine. I'll button this up, and then we will move on to the throttle linkage and a couple more things, and this thing will be ready to mate back with the transmission. And here is the transmission. So torque, or the flex plate is on before, then all the tabs over. So now we're ready to mount up the original transmission that came in this car. Well, it's not original to the car, it's been replaced at some point. Jaguar XJ6. And the only thing I've done is put the torque converter back in, cleaned everything up, and that's about it. Then once everything's back together, I'm going to clean the outside a little bit And in a future video, I will show you how to adjust the brake bands as well, because you guys seem to like that idea. Now I just want to see if we can mount all of this up together. And we're pretty close. The engine needs to come up a little bit. So this is sort of the fiddly bit, but it's been great having the transmission on this sort of skateboard thing to move it around the workshop. That's been very, very helpful. Oh yeah, there's one thing I sort of forgot. I just realized. I forgot to check that the dowel pins are the same, but that one just slid in there, so it seems that they are. There we go. That is starting to go into place now. I'm just going to start with a couple of the bolts, and I have checked once again that the thickness of the bell housing is the same on both transmissions, and I've chosen to use the bolts that came with this engine just because then I know that they work well with the threads in here. Let's see if I can just get the first one started. There we go, I think. That is one. I'm just going to work that one in a little bit. I think it actually is going in. It's just a very long bolt. Okay, grab a couple more. Take this one here. Alright, that's going in as well. It's just important not to cross thread these, but once a coupler in place, then it does have those two dowel pins, so everything should be lined up, but still being a little bit careful, of course. So all the bolts up top are the same, and the ones on the brackets on the side are bolts with nuts, loose nuts. So they go into brackets that are bolted to the engine instead. But, should be pretty straightforward. I'll just put all of these in, and then we'll turn the engine back a little bit, put a light in the back, and we'll put those torque converter bolts in. And we're getting very close to getting this engine ready. I have all the ones in place up top, so the ones that thread into the block. So I thought before I continue with the other ones, I'm going to torque them down. Torque spec is 35 foot-pounds or about 48 Newton meters. So got the torque wrench set to that. There we go. And that was the last one. So now I'm just going to put the bottom bolts in. I'm not going to forget to put the main negative or earth cable down over here. It's just soaking over in the parts washer right now because it was pretty grimy. So once that's cleaned off, that will go on. And then we'll get to the torque converter bolts. And then we have the cooler lines as well to hook up. And there is a spacer that goes over here to hold the dipstick. Can't forget about that. And then we also have to change over the whole throttle linkage because this transmission has a kickdown cable that needs to be swapped as well. But I think we're getting really close now. I put on the correct throttle linkage yesterday. The only real difference is that it has this part here for the cable for the kickdown, which is not on the other transmission. The rest of it is the same, but I just swapped the whole of it over. And now I just started on the first torque converter bolt. Pretty easy to do. I just turned the crank until I got the hole here, and I stuck my hand in here, and I can move the torque converter around until it lines up with the first bolt hole. I am simply just going to finger tighten them in, pretty much something like that, and then put a ratchet on the crank again, and try and do this one-handed while filming. There we have the next one. It is lining up nicely with torque converter, of course. And I'm going to put that one in as well. Then I got two more left to do. Then I will tighten them down. I'm going to check if there's a torque spec for them. There probably is. And then torque converter is connected again. We can move on to the starter. All four torque converter bolts are in, and they're torqued to 30 foot-pounds, or about 41 newton meters. And now it's time for the starter. So first of all, it's this plate that goes on here. And I have started cleaning up things a little bit. Like I said, I'm not doing anything drastic. I've decided I'm not going to paint anything on the engine or anything at the moment. I may do the cam covers in the summer when it's a little bit warmer and easier to do that. If I can get this thing in. But I just cleaned up this area here and just started wiping down here. It's because the starter goes here. And the only real thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the transmission. It has a lot of oil and grime on it. It's not from leaks on the transmission. It's just from that old engine. Leaked quite a bit of oil before I got it. And yeah, that's traveled back to the transmission. There we go. This thing is quite tight. That's in place. Here is the starter. I have the original Lucas Beast, but this one does work well. And oh yeah, it goes from that side. Alright, we're just going to snug those pretty tight. You don't want the starter falling out. And there we go. And that's it for this episode. It's been a lot of, just putting things back together, cleaning, figuring things out, the whole oil system, all of that. Some new gaskets. I do have a bit more cleaning left to do. A few more things to put on. One more thing I need to figure out. The mounting of the coil. I want to keep it mounted on the block like it was on the other engine, so I got to figure that out and do some more cleaning, but I'll do that off camera. So next time you see this engine, it will be a lot cleaner and it will be pretty much ready to go back in. We'll also prepare some things in the engine bay, but I will do that also off camera. Anyways, I hope you guys like following along, preparing this engine, and that you're as excited as I am to see this car back on the road. But it should be pretty quick now. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the bands need adjusting. If they do, I'll make a video on adjusting the brake bands. And then this thing should just slide back into the engine bay. Once it's in there, I got to put the water pump back on. I'm waiting on that gasket. It should be here any day now. And carbs, exhaust, cooling system, and a few other things. But hopefully that should all come together pretty quickly. Anyways, if you like this video, please give a thumbs up, share it with your friends. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot. Until next time, I'm Adam, and this was Living with a Classic. I'll see you soon.